The day I heard them talk about putting me in managed care, something inside me withered. It wasn't just the words my eldest grandson, Ben, used. It was how casually he said them, as if I were an old car leaking oil on his clean driveway. I was meant to be resting in the den, but the old air vents in this house carried sound like wind carries smoke. If we can get Grandpa declared mentally incompetent, Ben whispered, the lawyer said we could take over everything. Sell the property. Pay off our debt. He doesn't even remember where he left the shed key. I remembered. I remembered everything. I sat there in that worn-out recliner, the one with the stitched arms and the smell of mothballs, and I listened to my own blood plan my erasure. I'd built this home with my hands, laid its foundation brick by brick. Now, I was a roadblock to a payout. No tremble came. Just a long, hollow stillness in my chest. Ellen would have said to give them grace. But Ellen wasn't here anymore. And grace is something you give to the deserving, not to wolves in grandson's clothing. For the next few days, I let them think they were winning. I nodded when they reminded me of appointments I hadn't forgotten. I pretended I didn't hear the strange way they said, for his own good, when they thought I was asleep. I ate what they served me, tasteless food in portion trays, like I'd been downgraded to some nursing home simulation. But every night, when the house went quiet, I walked to the fireplace mantel and stared at the old photo of Ellen, smiling in her garden hat, holding a bunch of lilacs. She knew who I was. She knew what I built. And so did I. They thought I was fading. They thought I was gone. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. I'd just been waiting. Waiting for the right moment to pick up the key they thought I'd lost. The shed had been Ellen's idea. A place just for you, she'd said, pressing the brass key into my palm 30 years ago on my birthday. I remember the light in her eyes, how proud she was of the ribbon she'd tied around it. I'd been working long hours then, fixing power lines, digging trenches, chasing contracts across counties. My knees were younger, my back more forgiving. But the world was still heavy, and she knew it. So I built the shed myself. Tucked it behind the hydrangeas at the back of our property where the ivy grew wild and the soil stayed warm. A little sanctuary. A chapel, Ellen called it, not because we prayed there, though some days I did, but because it was sacred in the way quiet spaces are. It wasn't much, just a workbench, a small wood-burning stove, and a radio that only played static and memories. But it was mine. And in those early years, it became our rhythm. I'd wake up at 5, kiss her cheek, make coffee, and walk out to the shed before sunrise. Ellen would sometimes follow later, bringing me a sandwich, her laugh catching in the breeze. We'd talk about Caitlin's piano recitals or how the tomatoes weren't ripening. Simple things. Good things. When Ellen passed, everything grew quiet. Too quiet. The family clung together at first. Sunday dinners in the dining room she'd painted herself. Grandkids playing tag across the lawn. Mark, my son, even brought flowers sometimes, always lilies, which Ellen hated, but it was the thought that counted. But time has a way of drying the glue that holds families close. The dinners became sporadic. Mark remarried a woman named Diana, kind on the surface, but with eyes that never met mine. Caitlin moved to Seattle. Ben was always drifting. A job here, a project there. When he showed up at my door, broke and desperate, I took him in. Of course I did. He said, just a few weeks, Pop, until I get back on my feet. That was 6 years ago. I didn't ask for rent. I paid the utilities, bought groceries, even gave him money for an online degree when he said he wanted to make something of himself. He brought me tea some mornings and helped me set up my email. I thought we were close. But over time, I saw it. The way his eyes drifted when I spoke. The short sighs when I asked for help with the thermostat. Jenna, his wife, stopped hiding her irritation. The fridge began to fill with things I didn't recognize, protein powders, kale, tofu sausages, none of it for me. Once, I asked for peanut butter and found a sticky note on the jar, for meal prep only. Then there were the little disappearances. My checkbook misplaced. A small box of silver coins Ellen had collected, gone. When I asked, Ben said I must have forgotten where I'd put them. And for a while, I believed him. That's the thing about getting older. People start mistaking your pauses for confusion. You're quiet for incompetence. They think you're slipping, when really, you're just watching. Listening. And I listened. I listened to the way they spoke when they thought I was asleep in my chair. I listened to the cracks in their kindness. And most of all, I listened to the silence where love used to live. But I said nothing. Because silence can be stronger than shouting. It gives people just enough rope. Until one day, the vent carried their voices clear into my chest. If we can get Grandpa declared mentally incompetent, Ben whispered, we can take over everything. Sell the property. He doesn't even remember where he left the shed key. But I did. It was hanging from a red thread, inside the sock drawer Ellen lined with lavender sachets the year she died. I touched it every Sunday morning. Like clockwork. Like memory. The shed wasn't just a room. It was a vault of our life together. The original deed to the house. Our wedding rings. Receipts from the contractor who poured the foundation. Ellen's journals. My ledger of savings. Even a backup will, sealed in plastic. Things I hadn't shown anyone, not out of secrecy, but because I'd hoped I'd never need to. Now, I realized I might. It began with whispers. Not soft ones, hushed ones. The kind you hear through closed doors when someone thinks you're too slow, too tired, or too far gone to understand. Ben started spending more time in the guest house, on the phone. Always the same spot, always with the door half shut, always with one eye on whether I was in the room. Yes, the property is fully paid off, he whispered once. Just need to get control of the estate. We're already living here, it's basically ours anyway. Ours. That word hit harder than a slap. Then the small things shifted. Jenna changed the Wi-Fi password for security reasons. Suddenly, I needed to ask permission to watch TV, because the streaming service was under her account. The newspaper was cancelled, you can read the news online, right? But my laptop started having issues. They offered to get me a new one. They said it would be simpler. I said no. They stopped calling me by name. I became him in their conversations. Did you remind him to take his meds? Is he still keeping the heater on all night? That bill was huge. He doesn't need a full fridge. Then came the letter. A white envelope, stamped official, delivered by mistake to my mailbox instead of theirs. I opened it without thinking, assuming it was another pension statement or flyer. It wasn't. It was from a law office I didn't recognize. A petition had been filed to evaluate my mental competency. It referenced, concerning behaviors, inconsistent medication adherence, and evidence of early-stage cognitive decline. I read it 3 times. I set it down. Then I folded it and slid it into my shirt pocket, the same way I used to carry Ellen's love notes when I worked long shifts out of town. That evening, I joined them for dinner. Ben was on his phone. Jenna was scrolling. Neither looked up. Good roast, I said, even though it was dry. Needs salt, though. You shouldn't have too much salt at your age, Jenna replied, eyes still fixed on her screen. I suppose not, I murmured. We ate in silence. That night, I opened the sock drawer, slipped the key into my palm, and walked to the back of the property with a flashlight. The ivy had crept over the roof of the shed like a sleeping cat. I brushed away the branches and slid the key into the lock. It turned like it always had. Inside, everything was where I'd left it. The dust had settled over memories, but the memories were still alive. The ledger was safe. So was the strongbox. And in the back corner, wrapped in the old army blanket Ellen used for picnics, sat the envelope marked, "For Mr. Devlin only." I'd written it a decade ago, after Ellen's first cancer scare. It contained our updated will, letters, instructions, and my handwritten statement about the property. I sat in the shed for a long time. No flashlight. Just the glow of the lantern overhead, the quiet crackle of the old wood beams shifting in the cold. They'd lied to me. They'd filed paperwork behind my back, gathered evidence, called in assessments, all while smiling through dinners and asking if I wanted my tea with honey or lemon. They had counted me out. Me. But I wasn't out. Not even close. The next day, I began writing. Not just letters. Lists. Documentation. Dates. I began to recreate a record of the small thefts, the missing items, the conversations I'd overheard. I logged every insult, every manipulation. I wasn't building a case for court. I was building clarity, for myself. To remember who I'd been, and who they were now. Because betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a teaspoon at a time. A smile that feels colder than the room. A favor that slowly becomes a leash. They didn't want me dead. Not yet. But they wanted me erased, softly, efficiently, under the guise of love and protection. All while planning to carve up my life like a roast on Sunday. They didn't know I still had the key. They didn't know the door had never really been closed. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. That would have made it too easy for them, more evidence for their file, more fodder for whispered discussions about my stability. Instead, I became smaller. Quieter. A shadow in my own house. I stopped opening the curtains in the morning. The plants in the sunroom wilted. I let them. I stopped reminding Jenna about the laundry that needed switching or asking Ben to help replace the light bulb in the hallway. I simply moved through dim rooms and learned to do without. I boiled pasta for dinner 3 nights in a row. Ate it without salt. The silence in the house became an echo chamber. I spoke to Ellen more than I spoke to anyone else. I would sit in her old chair by the window, look at her photo, and whisper updates like she was in the next room. "Ben's applying for a new loan," I said once. "He used the house as an asset." Another night, they're having friends over again. Loud ones. They unplugged the landline in case I made a scene. I didn't. But the worst wasn't the loneliness or the food or the way they stopped knocking before entering my space. It was the memory of Ellen's voice the night before she died. She'd held my hand in the hospital, her grip frail but still firm, and whispered, "Don't let them forget what we built. Don't give it all away, Roy." I hadn't understood what she meant. I thought she was talking about memories, about stories to pass down. But now I realized, she saw it coming. The fading of gratitude. The corrosion of love by convenience. Maybe I had given too much. Maybe I'd made it too easy to take me for granted. I began to believe them. Maybe I was in decline. Maybe I had misplaced things. I caught myself standing in the kitchen unsure of why I'd come in. Once, I turned the kettle on and forgot to add water. It boiled dry. That frightened me. I started to keep a notebook. Not because I was worried they'd take away my rights, but because I needed proof I still remembered. Page 1, Monday. Took morning walk. Fed birds. Tea with lemon. Page 2, Tuesday. Rain. Heard Ben say he's just waiting on the paperwork. Page 3, Wednesday. Jenna told her sister they'll have full control within a month. I didn't write it with anger. I wrote it the way a scientist would. Observational. Methodical. Detached. But something inside was fraying. It's hard to explain, the weight of being unwanted in the very place you spent your life building. Every nail in the walls had a story. Every creak in the floorboards had a name. Yet somehow, I'd become the stranger here. One night, I walked into the kitchen and stared at the teacup I'd set out. I just stood there, Ellen's voice in my memory, "You always forget the sugar, Roy." I blinked. The sugar. I couldn't remember if I'd already added it. I poured the tea down the sink. I went to bed without dinner. That night, I dreamed of the shed. The ivy was gone. The door wide open. Inside, Ellen stood with her arms crossed, her expression neither angry nor kind. Just waiting. When I woke up, I went to the sock drawer and wrapped the red thread of the key around my finger. It was time to remember not just who I was, but who we had been. The man who built this life wasn't weak. He wasn't gone. He was just quiet. But he was still here. And so was the key. The following morning was sharp with spring frost, the kind that clings to the grass and window panes just long enough to remind you winter's still close behind. I woke with purpose. For the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake when I poured the kettle. I skipped the tea. I went straight to the shed. The ivy was thicker now, reaching like fingers over the corners of the roof. I pruned it back slowly, quietly. I didn't want Ben or Jenna to see me from the guest house. The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, the shed smelled the same, cedar and thyme. Dust motes swirled in shafts of early light. I closed the door behind me and exhaled. It was time. I pulled out the strongbox first. Inside, everything was right where I'd left it, the original deed, the list of improvements I'd made over the years, the second will Ellen and I had written together but never filed, because back then, we still believed in family. I placed everything carefully on the workbench. Then I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted more than any of them. Mr. Devlin. He'd been our family's attorney since the early '80s. He'd seen me through zoning issues, Ellen's estate, the first version of our will, even Ben's juvenile record when he was 18 and too arrogant for his own good. Devlin was in his 70s now, sharp as ever, and still practicing by appointment. When I told him I needed a private consultation, he didn't hesitate. "Your shed?" he asked. "Still out behind the hydrangeas?" I smiled. "Right where it's always been." He arrived the next morning wearing his old tweed coat and carrying his leather briefcase. His gait was slower, but his eyes were clear and curious. He took in the shed with reverence, brushing dust from the workbench before sitting down across from me. I laid out the documents. "I need to protect the house," I said. "From my own blood." He didn't ask questions. Just listened. I told him about the letter, the petition, the way they were circling like vultures. He nodded through it, taking notes with a pen that clicked softly between sentences. "We set up a trust," he said, tapping the bench with his knuckle. Quietly. "You retain full rights, but they won't see a penny unless you say so. We'll freeze access to joint accounts. Move the property title under the trust's name. You're still in control, but they'll be locked out unless you hand over the keys." "Sounds good," I said. "Roy," he said, voice softer, "are you prepared for what this will do to your family?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened a drawer and handed him a photograph. Ellen in the garden, holding up a dirt-covered radish like a trophy. Behind her, Ben, 5 years old, shirtless and grinning, eating strawberries off the vine. "I gave them everything," I said. "I just want to keep what's still mine." Devlin looked at the photo, then nodded once. "Let's get to work." We spent 3 hours in that shed. Drafting. Signing. Notarizing. Setting the pieces in motion like a slow, steady game of chess. I created the Roy and Ellen Trust. Transferred the house into it. Froze the accounts temporarily, for security checks. Updated the power of attorney and medical directives, assigning my decisions to a neutral executor, not family. We arranged everything to be untraceable for now. Ben wouldn't know until it was already done. And then we made copies. 3 sets. I hid one in the shed, in a tin box behind Ellen's seed packets. The second, I placed inside a locked drawer in my bedroom, buried beneath old photo albums. The third, Devlin took with him. If anything happens to me, I said, you know what to do. He reached across the table and shook my hand. I always did. That night, I returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table while Ben and Jenna watched some reality show in the next room. They didn't ask where I'd been. Didn't even glance up. I boiled pasta again. Ate it alone. They thought I was defeated. They thought they'd won. But the door had been unlocked. The key had turned. And I was no longer waiting. It started small. Ben came in one morning, teeth unbrushed, hair tousled, muttering something about his debit card not working. Fraud alert, maybe, he asked aloud, not really asking me. Jenna, already frustrated, was trying to order groceries online, her phone lighting up with "payment failed" messages. I sipped my tea and nodded sympathetically. Technology these days, I said. Over the next week, they got louder. Why is the mortgage account frozen? Jenna asked from the hallway, her voice pitched higher than usual. We had autopay set up. This is going to hit your credit, Ben. My credit? Ben barked. You used my name for the Home Depot card, remember? They argued more. Whispered less. The day the bank called, Ben stormed into the living room red-faced, waving his phone like it owed him something. They're saying I'm not on the property deed, he shouted. I looked up from my crossword. Strange. I thought you knew that already. His face twisted. Don't play dumb, Pop. You know what this is about. You're trying to cut us out. I folded the newspaper. No, Ben. I'm trying to remind you whose name built this place. The next day, I got a visit from the court-appointed assessor. A young woman named Camille, polite, professionally cheerful, clipboard in hand. She explained her role delicately, as if breaking bad news to a child. We're just here to ensure everything's in order, Mr. Hayes. It's routine. Family members sometimes, out of concern, request a wellness evaluation. Of course, I said, offering her tea. Would you like to sit in the shed? It's quieter. She blinked, surprised. The shed? I led her out back. In the space that smelled of cedar and oil, I handed her my notebooks. The daily logs. The spreadsheets I maintained of grocery spending, weather patterns, even a catalog of the birds that visited the garden. I showed her my checkbook, balanced to the cent. A small drawer of labeled medication, sorted by date and dose. Then I pulled out the letter from Mr. Devlin, co-signed by a physician I'd seen privately the month prior, confirming my mental fitness. Camille sat in silence for a moment, flipping through the material. You seem more organized than I am, she finally said. Don't let the slippers fool you, I smiled. By the time she left, she looked equal parts impressed and embarrassed. I walked her to her car and watched her drive away, knowing she'd be writing a very different report than the one Ben and Jenna had hoped for. That evening, Jenna didn't come to dinner. Ben ate in silence. I made meatloaf, Ellen's recipe, and offered him a slice. No, he muttered. We're not doing this. What are we doing then? I asked gently. He pushed away from the table and left the plate untouched. The mail came the next day, a thick envelope addressed to me, carbon copied to Ben and Jenna. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table while they watched from across the room. It was Camille's report, full mental competency, no further evaluation required, and a note of concern regarding conflicting motives among household members. Ben's jaw twitched. Jenna left the room. I stood, stretched, and took my empty teacup to the sink. "Oh," I said over my shoulder, "I'll be changing the locks next week. Just a precaution." Neither replied. But that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept through without waking once. By the following week, the moving boxes had appeared. At first, just a few. Ben claimed they were just organizing, but I knew better. There was panic in the way Jenna cleaned out the closet, fast and brittle, like someone erasing footprints. They didn't speak much. Their conversations had become clipped, filled with half-finished sentences and sideways glances. I never asked where they were going. I didn't need to. On Wednesday, I stood in the front room with the curtain pulled back just enough to see them loading their car. A suitcase with a broken zipper. Plastic bags crammed with clothes. Ben's laptop tucked under his arm. He looked smaller somehow. Like the house had shrunk him. Jenna walked out with a plant I recognized, one Ellen had nurtured for years. Without thinking, I stepped outside. "You'll want to leave that," I said softly. She paused. "It's just a plant." "It was hers," I said. "It stays." Jenna hesitated, then set it down on the porch and walked to the car without looking back. Ben lingered by the trunk. His eyes met mine for a second. "I thought you didn't care about any of this," he said. "You acted so soft." I tilted my head. "There's strength in quiet, Ben. But you wouldn't know that." He nodded once, bitter, maybe even regretful, then got into the driver's seat. They didn't say goodbye. The house was silent after they left, like it was holding its breath. I made tea. Sat at the kitchen table. Watched the late light stretch across the floorboards. The phone rang that evening. "Mark." "Dad," he said, voice unsure. "Ben told me you forced him out." "I reminded him who owns the house," I said. A long pause. "He says you're not well." "He's right," I replied, "just not in the way he thinks." I didn't explain further. A week passed. Then two. The mornings came easier. I planted new herbs in the garden. Repainted the front porch. Hired a young woman named Kelsey to help with groceries and errands. She brought her daughter once, a little girl with tangled curls and wide eyes. They picked wildflowers in Ellen's garden while I read on the porch. One afternoon, Kelsey asked me if I had family nearby. "I did," I said. "But I'm rebuilding." She nodded, as if she understood. Letters started to arrive from Mark. The first few were formal, filled with strained attempts at reconciliation. I didn't answer those. But later ones softened, memories, regrets, questions about Ellen. I answered those, in pencil, in longhand. One envelope included a photograph of Caitlin, my granddaughter, now with a child of her own. She looked like Ellen around the eyes. I put that picture in the shed. It felt like the house was healing. Or maybe I was. The doors stayed open longer in the afternoons. The wind felt warmer. The ivy on the shed no longer felt like it was hiding something, but keeping it safe. Ben never returned. Jenna sent a cold email once, requesting access to family heirlooms. I replied with a single line, "You already took more than enough." She didn't write again. It was late May when Mark finally came. He parked on the street, not in the driveway. Wore slacks and a tie, though it was Saturday. Carried nothing. That told me more than if he'd brought flowers or a bottle of wine. He wasn't here to apologize, he was here to explain. I met him on the porch. We stood there for a minute, just the two of us, the space between us heavier than ever. "I saw the report," he began. "The trust. The updated will. Everything." I nodded. "Then you know it's done." "I do," he said. "And I'm not here to fight it." That surprised me. He looked tired. Lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Less of the businessman, more of the boy I used to teach to tie his shoes. I came because. I don't know. I guess I didn't realize how far things had gone. Things didn't go anywhere, Mark, I said, gently. You just stopped walking beside me. He lowered his gaze. Ben told me you were slipping. That you didn't know what day it was. That you were hoarding, losing touch. And you believed him. I wanted to, he admitted. It was easier than thinking he'd turn on you. Silence. He shifted his weight. It was never about the money. No, I said, it was about respect. He winced. That landed. You always made us feel like we didn't measure up, he said, voice low. Like no matter what we did, we weren't enough. That's not true, I said. You made yourselves small when you forgot to be kind. His shoulders fell. I've been reading Ellen's letters, he confessed. The ones you sent after she died. I never opened them back then. But I found them in a box last week. I felt that like a tap on old glass. She was better than both of us, I said. He nodded. She said you forgave easily. That you believed in giving people a second chance. I looked at him then, really looked at him. Not the man who'd failed to protect me from his own son, but the boy who once gave me a drawing of a boat he'd named the Strong One. Who cried when I scraped my knee fixing his bike. I did, I said. But not third, fourth, and fifth chances. And not without change. Mark stepped off the porch and stood in the yard, looking out at the shed. She's in there, isn't she? He asked. I smiled. In every nail. Every beam. I should have protected you better. You should have remembered who taught you how to build things. He looked back at me. Is there anything left to fix? I didn't answer. Not yet. I turned, opened the door, and went back inside. Left it open behind me. He stood there for a long while before stepping in. The days that followed felt quieter, but not empty. I got back into my morning routines. The porch faced east, and Ellen always said that was the best direction for healing, something about how the sun touched your skin when you weren't looking. I started reading again. Books I'd been saving for later, because later had finally arrived. Revisited Ellen's old gardening journals and planted basil by the windowsill, just like she used to. The smell reminded me of Sunday dinners and laughter that reached the roof. Kelsey came by every few days with her daughter. I paid her well, not just for her help, but for the company she never knew she was giving. Little Ava brought me a drawing once, a picture of me holding hands with a lady in a straw hat. Your wife, she said proudly, as if she'd met Ellen herself. I framed it and hung it in the shed. Mark sent letters. Real ones. Ink and paper, like he knew that typing wouldn't carry the weight. They came once a week. At first, short and awkward. Then warmer. Honest. He told me he'd stepped away from the business. Said he was spending more time at home. That Caitlin had forgiven him, barely, and was thinking of visiting. He included a photo in one envelope, him with his granddaughter on his shoulders. She looked like Ellen too. I kept the photo beside the old seed tin. Once, he came by unannounced. He brought tools and asked if I wanted help fixing the garden fence. I didn't answer right away, just handed him a pair of gloves. We worked in silence. The good kind. At one point, he looked up and said, I didn't know it could be this simple. It always was, I said. You just made it complicated. We didn't talk about Ben. Not yet. Some wounds need to stay closed until they scar properly. Inside the house, I rearranged furniture. Opened windows. Let air and music move freely again. I started sleeping with the door open, not from fear, but from comfort. The walls no longer felt like they were listening for betrayal. They were listening for life. I even took out Ellen's recipe box and cooked her lemon chicken, using too much garlic like I always did. The smell filled the house. I swore I heard her laugh in the vent. The lock on the shed remained unchanged. So did the key. It still hung from the red thread in my sock drawer, but now I kept it visible. A reminder, not of what was threatened, but of what had endured. One afternoon, I sat in the shed with the door wide open, drinking tea while Ava drew chalk suns on the pathway. "You have a very pretty house," she said, twirling in the yard. "It's not just a house," I replied. "It's a promise." She didn't understand yet, but she would. Maybe one day, I'd give her the key. They thought I lost the key. They thought I was slipping, softening, surrendering. That my memory had faded like old wallpaper, that my silence meant surrender. They mistook quiet for weakness, nostalgia for decay, stillness for confusion. But the truth is simple. I had not lost the key. I was simply waiting until I needed it. The shed remained, as it always had, humble, weather-worn, unremarkable to anyone but me. It was never just a storage space. It was a vault of everything Ellen and I built, not just with wood and nails, but with sacrifice and care, with quiet mornings and handwritten plans, with love measured in hours and forgiveness measured in decades. In the end, the revenge wasn't in taking anything back, it was in protecting what mattered. In showing that the legacy they tried to steal wasn't money, or property, or even memory. It was the ability to stand, unshaken, in the ruins of their ambition and say, "This is mine." Still. Some doors stay closed until the heart is ready to walk through them. Mine is open now. And finally, so is my peace.